In an isolated mansion, the silence is broken by incessant barking. A mysterious dog guides the owner of the house to a forgotten trail. There, an unexpected discovery brings secrets to light, and the past connects to the present in a transformative way. The imposing mansion stood lonely against the sky of Petropolis, its windows closed like eyes that refused to see the outside world. Among the mountains of the Serra dos Órgãos, that century-old construction held not only the solitude of its owner, but also secrets that would begin to reveal themselves in unexpected ways. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. John Vance, a man in his 50s, meticulously trimmed grey hair and distant gaze, walked through the gardens of his property with the same mathematical precision of every day. His austere face rarely showed emotion, except when contemplating his precious antiques, collected over years of voluntary seclusion. On that specific autumn afternoon, while taking his routine walk, something disturbed his carefully cultivated peace. A bark, then another, and another. John frowned, irritated by the sonic invasion in his sanctuary of silence. He tried to ignore it, as he did with everything that threatened his routine, but the barking persisted, becoming more and more insistent. "Must be some lost dog," he muttered to himself, adjusting his wristwatch, a nervous habit that revealed his discomfort with unexpected situations. However, there was something different about those barks, an urgency that intrigued him against his will. After 20 minutes of resistance, John finally gave in to curiosity. He walked to the main gate, his steps echoing along the stone path he had designed years ago. There he found a stray dog, its colors undefined between brown and caramel, dirty and disheveled fur. But it was the animal's eyes that captured his attention, deep, determined, and strangely intelligent. "Go away," John ordered, his voice hoarse from little use. The dog merely tilted its head, as if assessing this human so resolute in his solitude. Instead of moving away, it sat down, keeping its gaze fixed on John. Helena, the housekeeper who had worked at the mansion for 2 decades, observed the scene from the kitchen window. It was the first time in years she had seen her employer interact with any living being besides her and the gardener. Something in that scene made her hold her breath, as if she sensed that this moment would mark a significant change. "Mr. John," she called, hesitant. "Maybe he's hungry." John ignored the comment, but couldn't ignore the animal's gaze. There was something about it that disturbed him, that made him question his own existence surrounded by walls and silence. The dog stood up and began to walk slowly away from the gate, stopping every few steps to look back, as if inviting John to follow it. "Don't be ridiculous," John said to himself. "I'm not going to follow some random dog." But his words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The animal continued on its way, each pause a silent invitation that echoed louder than any bark. John found himself in an internal conflict, to stay in his comfort zone, or to give in to the curiosity that now consumed him. Helena watched, mouth agape, as her employer, after minutes of visible hesitation, opened the gate for the first time in years. The creak of the rusty hinge sounded like music to her ears, a harbinger of change. "Mr. John," she called, worried. "Do you want me to call Sebastian to accompany you?" Sebastian was the gardener, an elderly gentleman who had been taking care of the property for as long as Helena. John made a negative gesture with his hand, his eyes fixed on the dog that was now guiding him beyond the limits of his property, towards the dense forest that surrounded the mansion. The afternoon sun painted elongated shadows on the ground, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the century-old trees. John followed the animal, his hesitant steps gradually gaining firmness. For the first time in years, he was venturing beyond his self-imposed walls, and a strange sensation was beginning to take hold of him, a mixture of fear and excitement he hadn't experienced in a long time. The dog led him along an almost invisible trail, covered by dry leaves and partially hidden by vegetation. John realized that, despite knowing every inch of his property, he had never noticed this path before. The trees seemed older here, their twisted trunks telling silent stories of times past. As they advanced, John felt his heart beating faster. It wasn't just the physical exercise, it was as if each step took him not only deeper into the forest, but also closer to something important, something he still couldn't name. The dog stopped abruptly in front of a tangle of vegetation. John, breathless from the unusual walk, observed the animal sniffing the ground with renewed interest. His instinct told him to return to the safety of his mansion, but something stronger kept him there, as if invisible threads of destiny pulled him forward. With an unexpected movement, the dog began to dig, gradually revealing what appeared to be an unnatural surface between the leaves and the earth. John approached, intrigued, and noticed a metallic contour emerging from the ground. His hands, for so long accustomed only to the touch of antiques in his collection, now pushed away earth and leaves, with an urgency he didn't recognize in himself. "Impossible," he murmured, discovering what appeared to be a camouflaged door. Years of isolation had sharpened his sense of observation, and that structure was definitely not natural. It was an entrance, skillfully disguised in the landscape, leading to some kind of underground shelter. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues that filtered through the treetops. The decreasing light created unsettling shadows in the forest, but John was too absorbed in his discovery to notice. With effort, he managed to open the heavy door, revealing a staircase that plunged into darkness. The dog, which had been watching attentively until then, descended the first steps with surprising familiarity. John hesitated. His rational mind screamed alerts about the dangers of entering an unknown and underground place, but his curiosity, dormant for so many years of routine, spoke louder. Taking his cell phone from his pocket, he activated the flashlight and followed the animal. The air was surprisingly fresh, although laden with the smell of earth and time. The walls were reinforced with old but well-preserved wood, suggesting that this place had been built to last. As he descended, John noticed details that his antique-trained mind recognized as significant. The construction technique, the materials used, everything indicated that this shelter had decades of existence. But why did it exist? And more importantly, why on his property? The space at the bottom of the stairs was larger than he expected. His flashlight revealed a series of scattered objects, furniture covered by dusty sheets, boxes stacked in corners, and something that immediately captured his attention: an old desk with various papers spread over it. Among the papers, a dark-covered notebook stood out. John picked it up carefully, recognizing the quality of the aged leather. As he opened it, he realized it was a diary. The yellowed pages were filled with elegant handwriting, although some parts were stained by moisture. "March 12th, 1975, he read in a low voice, feeling an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. The first lines made him hold his breath. If someone finds this diary, it means the treasure is still safe, but it also means that the time has come to reveal the truth about this property and about the Vance family. John almost dropped the diary. His surname there, written decades ago, in a secret shelter on his property. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, each word revealing a mystery greater than he could have imagined. The dog, which had settled in a corner, watched attentively every movement of John. Its eyes shone in the gloom with an almost supernatural intelligence, as if it were more than just a lost animal, perhaps a guardian, a guide destined to awaken John from his self-imposed isolation. Absorbed in reading, John hardly noticed the time passing. The diary spoke of secret meetings, of people who needed help, of a greater purpose that his family had once served, but it was a specific passage that made his heart race. The true treasure cannot be measured in gold or jewels. It is something much more valuable, something that will forever change the life of whoever finds it. But only those who are ready to see beyond appearances will be able to understand its real value. A sudden noise on the upper floor made John raise his head, alert. The dog also stood up, ears erect, attentive. For a moment, the silence seemed deafening. Then, footsteps. Someone was up there near the entrance to the shelter. John quickly turned off the cell phone flashlight, plunging the environment into total darkness. His heart was beating so hard that he feared the sound would give him away. The dog, surprisingly, remained in absolute silence, as if understanding the need for secrecy. The footsteps continued, now closer to the shelter entrance. John held the diary against his chest, his mind racing with possibilities. Who else knew about this place? Why would someone be here on the very day he discovered it? And more importantly, what was that person looking for? The footsteps above the shelter abruptly ceased. John held his breath, feeling each second weigh like lead. The dog remained motionless at his side, like a living statue guarding an ancient secret. The darkness around him seemed to swallow even his thoughts. Minutes dragged on like hours until the footsteps resumed, now slowly moving away. John waited until the last echo disappeared before daring to turn on the cell phone flashlight again. The beam of light revealed that the dog was watching him, with an almost human expression of concern. "We need to get out of here," John murmured, tucking the diary into the inside pocket of his coat. Something told him that this object was more important than he could imagine. Cautiously, he climbed the stairs, the dog silently following his steps. As he emerged on the surface, night had already fallen completely. The forest was different in the darkness, full of dancing shadows and mysterious sounds. John realized he was far from his comfort zone, but strangely he didn't feel afraid. Only a pulsating urgency to discover more about the secrets that were beginning to reveal themselves. Helena almost fainted when John finally returned to the mansion, hours after his unexplained departure. The dog followed him, as if it had always belonged to that place. "For God's sake, Mr. John, I was about to call for help," exclaimed the housekeeper, her face a mask of genuine concern. "You've never been out for so long." "Everything is fine, Helena," John replied, his voice sounding different even to himself. "In fact, it's more than fine. Prepare a room for our new guest," he added, indicating the dog that had sat politely on the entrance mat. Helena blinked several times, trying to process the surreal scene before her eyes. In over 20 years of work, she had never imagined seeing her employer bringing an animal into the house, much less a dirty stray from the street. "And Helena," John called before climbing the stairs, "please don't mention my outing today to anyone. To no one." In his office, John closed the doors and began to examine the diary meticulously. The pages revealed a story that seemed to come out of a mystery novel. His grandfather, Vincent Faria Vance, had built not just the mansion, but a secret network to support people who needed to disappear for a while. "The shelter is just the beginning," said one passage. "There are other safe points scattered throughout the property, each holding a part of the puzzle. The complete map is where no one would think to look, right under everyone's eyes." John raised his eyes from the diary, his gaze wandering over the wall covered with old paintings. Each painting had been personally chosen by him over the years, but now he wondered if there was something more to that collection. Could his obsessive interest in antiques be more than just a coincidence? The dog, which he was beginning to think of calling Guardian, suddenly stood up, its ears alert. Seconds later, the mansion's doorbell rang, making John jump from his chair. Who could it be at this hour of the night? From the office window, he saw an unfamiliar car parked in front of the main gate. Helena was already heading to attend to the unexpected visitor when John intercepted her through the internal intercom. "Let me answer it, Helena. Please go rest." On the security system monitor, John observed a familiar figure approaching the gate. Mrs. Martha, his oldest neighbor. The white-haired lady with elegant posture rarely visited him, respecting his privacy. Her presence there on this specific night couldn't be a coincidence. "John?" Mrs. Martha's voice sounded through the intercom. "Forgive me the hour, but we need to talk. It's about what you found today in the forest." A chill ran down John's spine. How could she know? The dog approached, gently leaning against his leg, as if offering silent support. John looked at the diary on his desk, at the dog by his side, and finally at the image of Mrs. Martha on the monitor. Something told him that by opening that gate he would be taking another step of no return towards a truth that would change his life forever. The question was he ready to face what was to come? John hesitated for a few moments before pressing the button that would open the gate. In all his years of seclusion, he had never received a visitor so late at night. The dog remained by his side, surprisingly calm, as if approving his decision. Mrs. Martha crossed the garden with firm steps that belied her advanced age. Her eyes, lively and perceptive, examined the facade of the mansion with an interest that seemed to go beyond mere curiosity. John waited for her at the main door, feeling strangely vulnerable. "Good evening, John," she said, her voice carrying a poorly disguised tone of urgency. "I see you've already met the Guardian." John's eyes widened in surprise. "Guardian?" "Yes, that's what we call him. He has been with us longer than you can imagine," Martha replied, caressing the head of the dog that had approached to greet her like an old friend. In the office, John offered an armchair to his visitor, noticing how she examined every detail of the environment with a knowing look. The dog, now officially guardian, settled between them, as if prepared to witness an important conversation. "You found the diary, didn't you?" Martha asked, going straight to the point. Vincent knew this day would come. He always said that the blood of the Vances would eventually speak louder. John felt his heart race. "How do you know about the diary? And how did you know my grandfather?" An enigmatic smile appeared on Martha's lips. "Your family and mine share a very old history, John. A history that began long before this mansion was built, when this region was just forest and dreams." She stood up, walking to one of the paintings on the wall, an old landscape of Petropolis that John had always particularly admired. "This canvas, do you know why your grandfather always kept it in this exact place?" John shook his head, watching as Martha gently removed the painting from the wall, revealing a small built-in safe that he had never noticed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed a sequence of numbers on the panel. "The date that's on the first page of the diary," she explained, seeing his surprised expression. Vincent was always methodical in his codes. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing its interior. Martha removed a yellowed envelope and some old documents. "Your grandfather wasn't just a rich man who built a mansion in the mountains, John. He was a guardian, like his ancestors before him. And now you need to understand your legacy." John's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside, he found old black and white photographs showing his mansion at different times. In one of them, a group of people was gathered in the garden, including his grandfather, younger but unmistakable, and a young woman who looked very much like Martha. "This photo was taken in 1962, she explained, her voice laden with emotion. "It was when everything started to change. When your family decided to use their wealth and influence not just to accumulate power, but to protect those who needed help." John stared fixedly at the photograph, trying to process the information. "But why did no one ever tell me about this? Why was I kept in the dark about my own history?" Martha sighed deeply. "Your parents thought it would be safer to keep you away from all of this, especially after what happened to them. They wanted to protect you, give you a chance to choose your own path." The guardian approached John, placing its head on his knee, as if sensing his confusion and wanting to comfort him. Martha observed the scene with a knowing smile. "It's no coincidence that he found you today," she continued. "The guardians always appear when it's time for a Vance to awaken to their true purpose. Your isolation, your passion for antiques, even your reluctance to relate to people, all of this is part of who you are. But it's not all you can be." John looked at the documents in his hands, at the dog by his side, and finally at Martha. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" "That the time has come, John," she replied, her voice firm. "The time for you to discover the true treasure that your family protected. And more importantly, the time has come for you to decide if you want to continue this legacy." The night advanced as Martha continued her narrative, each word revealing a new layer of the mystery that surrounded the Vance family. John listened attentively, his lonely and organized world crumbling before each revelation. "Your grandfather, Vincent," Martha continued, removing more documents from the safe, "transformed this mansion into much more than a simple residence. He created an intricate network of shelters and passages, all connected by a greater purpose." John examined the papers she handed him, detailed architectural plans of the property, some clearly older than others, all marked with symbols and annotations that didn't make immediate sense. "But what was this purpose?" he questioned, his voice betraying a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Martha stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the gardens illuminated by the moon. "Have you ever wondered why your family chose to build such a large mansion in such an isolated location?" Before John could answer, she continued, "In the 1960s, the Blue Ridge Mountains were more than just a mountain range. It was a refuge point for people who needed to disappear for a while, artists, intellectuals, entire families who needed protection. The guardian, who had been resting silently until then, raised his head as if recognizing the importance of that moment. John noticed that the animal now seemed different, more noble, more aware of its role. Vincent Vance used his fortune and influence to create a protection network," Martha explained. "This mansion, with its labyrinthine gardens and underground structures, became a sanctuary. People arrived during the night, stayed as long as necessary, and left with new identities, new chances at life. John felt a shiver run down his spine. And the other residents of the region, didn't anyone suspect? An enigmatic smile appeared on Martha's lips. Some knew, others suspected, but most chose not to ask questions. Your family has always been respected in the region, John. The Vance name carries a weight that goes beyond money. She approached one of the bookshelves, her fingers sliding over the old spines. Every object in this house was chosen with a purpose. Your love for antiques is no coincidence. It's in your blood. Vincent knew that one day you would take your place in this story. But why now? Asked John, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations. Because people still need help, John, Martha replied, her voice soft but firm. The world has changed, but the need for protection and refuge remains the same, and the signs have begun to appear. Signs? The Guardian doesn't appear by chance, she explained, caressing the dog's head. He has been guiding people to this property for generations. Some say it's the same dog, others believe it's a special lineage. What we know is that he always appears when new guardians need to awaken. John looked at the animal with new eyes, remembering the determination with which it had guided him to the underground shelter. And those footsteps we heard in the shelter today? Martha became serious. Not everyone who knows the secrets of this property shares the same ideals, John. Your grandfather had adversaries, people who never accepted the role that the Vance family chose to play. And they're still out there searching for what? The complete map, she replied, picking up one of the architectural plans. These are just parts of the puzzle. The real map, the one that shows the entire network of shelters and passages, is hidden somewhere in this mansion, and only a Vance can find it. At that moment, a noise coming from the garden caught everyone's attention. The Guardian stood up, alert, his ears turned towards the direction of the sound. Through the window, John saw lights moving among the trees. Flashlights, perhaps. They're getting bolder, Martha murmured, her expression worried. John, you need to make a decision. Your family's legacy can't wait any longer. The lights in the garden multiplied, dancing among the shadows of the trees like threatening fireflies. John felt his heart accelerate. Years of isolation had not prepared him for a situation like this. Helen, he called through the internal intercom, his voice firmer than he expected. Activate the security system and lock all the doors. Don't open for anyone. But Mr. Vance, what's happening? The housekeeper's concerned voice echoed through the device. Just do as I asked, Helen, and stay in your room until further notice. Martha observed the movement in the garden with the calm of someone who had experienced similar situations before. They won't try anything too bold, John. Not yet. They're just testing, observing your reaction. The Guardian positioned itself between the window and the two of them, its behavior subtly changing. It was no longer just a stray dog. There was something almost solemn in its posture, like a soldier at his post. I need to show you something, said Martha, heading to one of the bookshelves. Vincent made me promise that I would only reveal this when it was absolutely necessary. Her experienced fingers slid over a row of old books until they stopped on a specific volume, a first edition of Don Quixote that John had always considered one of the most valuable pieces in his collection. Your grandfather had a peculiar sense of humor, she commented, carefully removing the book. Choosing a story about a man who fought against windmills to guard one of the family's most important secrets. With precise movements, Martha manipulated the spine of the book, revealing a hidden compartment. From inside it, she retrieved a small golden medallion with the initials VF had engraved. Vincent Farris, John murmured, recognizing his grandfather's initials. More than that, Martha corrected. Vigilance and fortitude, the secret motto of the Vance family. This medallion is a key, John. A key that opens much more than doors. In the garden, the lights were beginning to approach the mansion. The Guardian emitted a low growl, almost inaudible, its eyes fixed on the shadows moving outside. We don't have much time, Martha continued, handing the medallion to John. Your grandfather built this mansion as a giant puzzle. Each room holds clues. Each object may have a hidden meaning. The medallion is just the beginning. John held the object in his hands, feeling its weight, not just physical but symbolic. Years of solitude and routine had built walls around him, but now those walls were beginning to crumble, revealing a greater purpose. And if I'm not ready, he asked, his voice betraying an insecurity he hadn't allowed himself to show in a long time. You're already ready, John, Martha replied with conviction. your isolation, your obsession with antiques, your attention to detail, all of this was preparation. The blood of the Vances runs in your veins, and now it's time to honor that legacy. A metallic sound echoed through the garden. Someone was trying to force the side gate. The Guardian immediately headed to the office door as if indicating they needed to move. "They won't give up easily," said Martha, quickly gathering the scattered documents. "What your grandfather built here is too important. People depended on this in the past, and others will depend on it in the future." John looked at the medallion in his hands, at the alert Guardian, and at the lights that now surrounded his mansion. His entire life had been dedicated to collecting and preserving the past, but now he realized that perhaps he had been preserving something much greater than antiques. "What should I do?" he asked, feeling the weight of responsibility in every word. "Trust the Guardian," Martha replied, a mysterious smile on her lips. "He knows all the secrets of this property, and more importantly, trust your instincts, John. The blood of the Vances always knows the way." The Guardian led John and Martha out of the office with silent urgency. In the hallway, shadows danced on the walls as the garden lights drew ever closer to the mansion. "This way," Martha whispered, guiding them towards the library. John had never noticed before, but now he realized how each room in his house seemed to be part of a larger plan, an intricate design he was only beginning to understand. The library, his favorite refuge during years of seclusion, now seemed different. Each shelf, each book could hide a secret. The medallion in his pocket seemed to pulse, as if responding to the proximity of something important. "Your grandfather always said that true wealth is in books," Martha commented, her eyes scanning the shelves. But he wasn't just talking about knowledge. John held the medallion, observing how the moonlight entering through the high windows reflected on the engraved initials. It was then that he noticed something. The pattern of the carving on the wood of one of the shelves seemed to mirror the design of the medallion. "There," he pointed, surprising himself with his own perception. The Guardian was already beside the shelf in question, its muzzle gently touching a specific point on the wood. John approached, guided by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, and fitted the medallion into the cavity he had discovered. A soft click echoed through the library, and an entire section of the shelf moved a few inches inward, revealing a narrow passage. "The tunnels," Martha murmured, her voice filled with reverence. "Vincent built a network of them under the property. This is just one of the entrances." Outside, voices were beginning to be heard, still distant but approaching. Helen, from her room, tried to make contact again through the intercom. "Mr. Vance, there are people trying to jump over the back wall." John felt a strange calm come over him. It was as if all the pieces of his life, his seclusion, his love for antiques, his obsessive attention to detail, finally made sense. "Helen," he replied through the intercom, "lock yourself in your room and don't come out until I say so. Everything is under control." Martha smiled as she heard his words. "You already speak like a true Guardian." The Guardian entered the passage first, its light fur almost glowing in the darkness like a guiding beacon. John and Martha followed, closing the entrance behind them. In the narrow space, John activated his cell phone flashlight, revealing a well-constructed tunnel with reinforced walls and an ingenious ventilation system. "Your grandfather thought of everything," Martha explained as they advanced. "These tunnels are not just escape routes. They're part of a larger system, a network that connects important points on the property." As they walked, John noticed markings on the walls, discrete symbols that seemed to indicate directions. The Guardian moved with certainty, as if it knew every inch of the path. "But what exactly are they looking for?" John asked, referring to the intruders outside. "What is so important here besides these tunnels?" Martha stopped for a moment, her serious expression visible in the flashlight's beam. "The complete map, John, not just of the passages, but of the entire protection network that your family built over generations. Safe places, contacts, escape routes, information that could save or condemn many people." A distant noise echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps above them, people moving through the mansion. "They've entered," John whispered, his heart racing. "Yes," Martha confirmed, "but they won't find what they're looking for. The true treasure of the Vances was never in the tunnels or maps. It's in something much more valuable." The Guardian stopped abruptly in front of a fork, its eyes shining in the dimness. John felt the medallion heat up in his pocket as if responding to some invisible call. It's time for you to discover what your grandfather really protected, John, Martha said, her voice laden with meaning. And more importantly, it's time for you to decide what kind of guardian you want to be. At the fork in the tunnel, the medallion in his pocket seemed to pulse with its own energy. John removed it, observing how the engraved initials shone differently under the light of his flashlight. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't seen before: small marks around the letters VF. Their coordinates, he murmured, years of studying antiques helping him decipher the pattern. The medallion isn't just a key, it's a compass. Martha nodded, a smile of approval on her face. Vincent knew you would understand. Your obsession with details wasn't for nothing. The guardian watched attentively as John aligned the medallion with the markings on the tunnel wall. When he found the correct position, another soft click echoed through the confined space, and a camouflaged door opened in the right wall. The archives room, Martha whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Very few people know of its existence. The room that was revealed was surprising. A circular room, smaller than the library, but equally impressive. Shelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with folders, documents, and carefully catalogued objects. Each folder, Martha explained, tells the story of someone your family helped. Each object has a meaning, a memory, a purpose. John approached one of the shelves, his fingers sliding over the chronologically organized folders. Names, dates, photographs, fragments of lives that his family had helped preserve. But how? He began, interrupted by a noise coming from the tunnels. The guardian immediately positioned itself at the entrance of the room, alerting them to someone's approach. Martha quickly closed the camouflaged door, plunging them into tense silence. There are others who know about the tunnels, she whispered. People who worked with your grandfather but who later followed different paths. John held the medallion tightly, feeling its historical weight. In the silence of the archives room, he could hear footsteps echoing through the tunnels, getting closer and closer. What do they really want? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Control, Martha replied. The network your family built is powerful, John. Not just for the tunnels and shelters, but for the connections, for the trust that the Vance name has built over generations. The guardian remained alert, its eyes fixed on the door. John realized that the animal showed no fear, only a serene determination to protect that space. Look at this, Martha called, removing a specific folder from one of the shelves. Inside, John found old photographs of his mansion, but with a crucial detail. In each image, a dog similar to the guardian appeared in different eras. Impossible, he murmured, observing the dates on the photographs. They seem to be the same animal. The guardians are special, John, Martha explained. They appear when necessary, guide those who need to be guided, protect what needs to be protected. Their presence has always signified moments of change for your family. A new noise, closer now, made everyone freeze. The light from flashlights could be seen through the cracks of the camouflaged door. We need to move, Martha whispered. This room has another exit, but before that you need to understand something. The true treasure that your family protects isn't in these archives. No? John asked, confused. No. It's in the purpose, in the mission that your family chose. Each person helped, each life transformed. That is the true legacy of the Vances. And now, John, you need to decide if you're ready to be part of that. The guardian approached a specific shelf, touching a particular point on the wood with its muzzle. John observed the spot and, using the medallion as a guide, discovered another hidden mechanism. The footsteps in the tunnel were getting closer and closer. The decision John needed to make was not just about fleeing or staying. It was about who he really was and who he wanted to become. John stared at the mechanism revealed by the guardian, his years of isolation seeming to melt away in the urgency of the moment. With steady fingers, he positioned the medallion in the new lock, causing a soft sliding of hidden gears. Quick, Martha whispered, as a passage opened in the back wall. They're almost here. But John didn't move. Something inside him had changed, a certainty that grew with each passing second. The guardian watched him with those deep, wise eyes, as if awaiting his decision. No, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. We're not running away. Martha looked at him, a mixture of surprise and pride on her face. Are you sure? This is my home, my heritage, John replied, straightening his shoulders. For years I lived hidden between these walls, collecting antiques as if they were just objects. Now I understand that each piece tells a story. Each room holds a mission. The Guardian positioned itself at his side, as if approving his decision. The footsteps in the tunnel were getting closer, and the light from flashlights was already dancing under the camouflaged door. "If they want to find the Vance treasure," John continued, "let's show them exactly what that means." With precise movements, he began to remove specific folders from the shelves, guided by an intuition he didn't know he possessed. The medallion in his hands seemed to pulse, as if responding to his newly discovered purpose. "Every person my family helped," he said, quickly leafing through the documents. "Every life transformed. They're not just stories in an archive. They're proof that there will always be people willing to do good, even in the shadows." Martha observed his movements with an enigmatic smile. "Vincent used to say that the day would come when you would understand. The true power of the Vances was never in the tunnels or secret maps." The room's door shuddered. Someone on the other side was trying to open it. John organized the selected documents on a central table, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle. "The power is in the choices we make," he completed, finally understanding. "In the courage to stand firm when it would be easier to run." The Guardian barked once, a deep and profound sound that echoed through the room. At the same instant, the lights of the emergency system came on, bathing the environment in a soft but firm glow. "How?" Martha began, surprised. "I installed a modern security system a few years ago," explained John, a slight smile on his lips. "I've always liked technology, even though I preferred to live among antiques. Now I see that each hobby, each interest, had a greater purpose." The door shuddered again. John positioned himself behind the desk, the documents organized in front of him like a map of his family's legacy. The Guardian remained by his side, serene and alert. "Let them in," he said to Martha, who still hesitated near the secret passage in the back. "It's time to show that the Vances don't just keep secrets, they protect something much more valuable." Martha nodded, understanding. She positioned herself beside John, her presence a living reminder of the history that connected them. The Guardian maintained its vigilant posture, its eyes fixed on the door that continued to tremble. "You really are your grandfather's grandson," she murmured, proud. John held the medallion firmly, feeling the weight of generations in his hands. The moment of his true initiation as Guardian had arrived, not in dark tunnels or desperate escapes, but here, firm in his purpose, ready to face whatever might come. The door began to give way. The door burst open with a crash, revealing 3 figures in the entrance. In front, an elegant, middle-aged woman, her grey hair impeccably arranged. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits, their tense expressions revealing surprise at finding John calmly seated behind the desk. "Beatrice Mendez," said Martha, her voice laden with recognition. "I thought you had given up this search a long time ago." The woman entered the room with firm steps, her eyes quickly scanning the shelves before fixing on John. "So the last of the Vances has finally discovered his legacy. I must admit, I didn't expect to find you here." John remained serene, the Guardian motionless at his side. "You knew my grandfather?" "I worked with Vincent for years," Beatrice replied, a bitter smile on her lips. "We were part of the same network until he decided that some secrets should remain buried." "The secrets that protected innocent people," Martha intervened, her voice firm. Beatrice ignored the comment, her eyes fixed on the documents on the table. "I see you've already found part of the archives. But what we're looking for is something bigger. The complete map, the record of all connections." "For what purpose?" John questioned, his voice calm but assertive. "To transform a protection network into something different." The Guardian emitted a low growl when the men tried to approach the table. Beatrice gestured for them to back off. "You don't understand, John," she said, her voice softening. "The world has changed. What your grandfather built could be used in much more efficient ways." "Efficient?" John repeated, calmly leafing through one of the files in front of him. "Like this family in 1975, who found shelter here when they had nowhere else to go. Or this artist in 1982 who needed to disappear to continue his work." Beatrice frowned, her mask of elegance beginning to crack. "Old stories. Today we need structure, organization, power." "The power to help," John completed, slowly standing up. "The only power that interested my grandfather." The Guardian moved silently, positioning itself between the intruders and the most important shelves. John noticed that the animal seemed larger now, more imposing. "You know what I discovered today?" he continued, his voice gaining strength. "That my isolation, my obsession with antiques, even my attention to detail, none of it was by chance. Each characteristic prepared me for this moment." Beatrice took a step forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of ambition and frustration. "Don't be foolish, John. With your fortune and our connections, we could transform this network into something much more lucrative. Like your attempt in 1985, Martha intervened, pulling a specific folder from the shelves. "When you tried to sell information and Vincent removed you from the organization." Beatrice's face paled slightly. John observed the reaction, all the pieces falling into place in his mind. "That's why you're here," he concluded. "It's not just about the map, it's about revenge." "Revenge?" Beatrice retorted, regaining her composure. "Call it justice. Vincent Vance had no right to decide alone the fate of this organization." John picked up the medallion, letting it shine under the light. It wasn't his decision. It was the Vance family's, generation after generation, each choosing to protect instead of exploit. The air in the room seemed charged with electricity. The Guardian maintained its position, its eyes alternating between the intruders with an almost supernatural intelligence. "And now," John continued, his voice laden with determination, "as the last of the Vances, I make my choice." "My choice," John continued, his voice echoing through the archives room, "is to honor my family's legacy." With a precise movement, he pressed the medallion against a specific point on the table, activating a hidden mechanism. The lights in the room flickered, and a soft hum filled the environment. "Impossible," Beatrice murmured, watching as panels in the walls slid open, revealing screens and modern equipment perfectly integrated into the old structure. "How?" "You were looking for a paper map, Beatrice," John explained, a slight smile on his lips. "But my grandfather knew that the future would require more than that. In recent years, while everyone saw me as a recluse obsessed with antiques, I was digitizing, updating, protecting." Martha watched with admiration as the screens displayed an intricate network of connections, safe points, escape routes, the entire system that the Vances had built over generations, now adapted for the modern era. "Every antique in this house," John continued, "every book, every painting, they all have an embedded code, a part of the puzzle. The true map isn't in one place, it's everywhere." The Guardian moved, positioning itself beside John with an even more dignified posture. The men accompanying Beatrice instinctively retreated. "You think you've modernized the system?" Beatrice challenged, although her voice betrayed a note of insecurity. "That only makes it more vulnerable. Not when each part is protected by something stronger than passwords or firewalls," John replied. "The system only works with the Vance medallion, activated by someone who carries not only the family's blood, but also its purpose." The screens now showed images of people helped over the years, stories of transformed lives, a web of hope and protection that extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. "You see, Beatrice," Martha said, her voice soft but firm, "this is what you never understood. The power of the Vances was never in the maps or tunnels. It was in the choice to use all of this for good." Beatrice watched the screens, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You can't simply prevent me from—" "I don't need to prevent," John interrupted, "because right now, as we speak, the system is updating itself. Every route, every connection, every safe point, everything is being modified and reconfigured. All your years of work," Beatrice began, perplexed, "is being preserved," John completed. "Just adapted as it always has been. The network continues, the purposes remain, only the paths change. This is how we've survived for generations." The Guardian emitted a low sound, almost like a sigh of satisfaction. On the screens, the data continued to flow, creating new patterns, new possibilities. "So that's it?" Beatrice asked, her voice now more tired than angry. "Years of searching for nothing?" "Not for nothing," John replied, his voice softening. "To understand that some things are greater than ambition or revenge. The Vance legacy is not for sale, Beatrice. It never was." The men accompanying her were already retreating towards the door, sensing that the situation had irreversibly changed. Beatrice remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the screens that continued to show the real scope of the Vances' work. "You can choose, Beatrice," Martha said, taking a step forward, "just as you chose years ago. But this time think about the true meaning of all this." John observed the woman who had once worked with his grandfather, seeing in her the reflection of a different choice, a path he could have taken if he hadn't understood the true purpose of his inheritance. The Guardian moved silently to the door, as if indicating the way forward. On the screens, the update process continued, transforming an old network into something new, but keeping its essential purpose intact. It was the moment of truth, not just for Beatrice, but for all present. The Vance legacy was alive, adapted to new times, but its essence remained the same: to protect, to guard, to serve. Beatrice remained silent for long moments, her eyes scanning the screens that showed the true reach of the Vance legacy. The archives room seemed to breathe with a life of its own, decades of stories and secrets pulsing in its walls. "I used to believe in the same ideals," she finally said, her voice laden with long-contained emotion. "Vincent showed me a world where doing good was more important than any wealth." John observed a subtle change in her posture, as if an invisible weight was beginning to dissipate from her shoulders. The Guardian, still posted near the door, kept its eyes attentive, but its posture was more relaxed. "What changed, Beatrice?" Martha asked softly. "At what point did power become more important than purpose?" "Maybe," Beatrice hesitated, her hands lightly touching one of the old shelves, "maybe when I forgot that each folder, each document here, represents a transformed life, not just an opportunity for gain." The men accompanying her had already retreated to the corridor, sensing that their presence there had become unnecessary. John made a subtle gesture, and more screens lit up, showing images of people who had found refuge in the Vance network over the years. "See that family there?" John pointed to one of the screens. 1985. You helped them find a new home, a new beginning. It's in the records, Beatrice. Your name, your actions, the good you did. Discreet tears shone in the woman's eyes. "I remember them." The girl was only 6 years old. She held my hand during the entire journey to the shelter. "The system never forgets," John continued, his voice firm but gentle. "Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, everything is recorded here, including your own story." Martha approached a specific shelf, pulling out an old folder. "You were also helped once, weren't you, before joining the organization?" Beatrice nodded slowly, long repressed memories returning to the surface. "I was young. I was in danger. Vincent offered me not just protection, but a purpose. And that purpose can still be yours," John said, surprising everyone. "The Vance network doesn't exist just to protect people, but to redeem those who have lost their way." The Guardian moved then, approaching Beatrice with soft steps. Its eyes, deep and wise, met hers in a moment of silent understanding. "What are you proposing, John?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Her choice," he replied. "The same choice my grandfather offered to so many others before. The chance to be part of something greater than ourselves." The screens continued to display the constant flow of data, but now Beatrice saw them with different eyes. They were no longer just valuable information, but a living fabric of human stories, of lives intertwined by a common purpose. "It wouldn't be so simple," she protested weakly. "After everything I've done—" "Nothing is simple," Martha intervened. "But the Vance network has always been about second chances, about believing in people's capacity to choose a better path." John approached, the medallion softly glowing in his hands. "The choice is yours, Beatrice. But know that just as my grandfather saw potential in you years ago, I see it too." The Guardian emitted a low sound, almost musical, as if approving John's words. In the archives room, past and present seemed to meet in a moment of possible redemption. Beatrice's response could change not only her own destiny, but the future of the Vance network. The air was charged with expectation, possibilities, hope. Beatrice extended her trembling hand, her fingers gently touching the medallion John held. At the moment of contact, the lights in the room pulsed softly, as if the mansion itself responded to that gesture of surrender and hope. "All this time," she said, her voice choked, "I sought power when in fact I already had something much more valuable in my hands." The Guardian approached, gently leaning against her leg, a gesture of acceptance that finally brought tears to Beatrice's face. John observed the scene with an understanding that he only now realized he had inherited from his grandfather: the ability to see beyond appearances, to perceive the potential for redemption in each person. "Helen," John called over the intercom, "can you prepare tea for everyone in the main library? And don't worry about the visitors anymore." Martha smiled, recognizing in that simple gesture the same hospitality that Vincent had always shown, even in the tensest moments. The men accompanying Beatrice had already left, sensing that their presence there was no longer necessary. "What happens now?" Beatrice asked, discreetly wiping away tears. "Now," John replied, activating a new sequence on the screens, "we begin to rebuild, not just the network, but trust. Your experience can be valuable, Beatrice, especially now that you understand the true purpose of all this." The screens now showed a different map, no longer routes and hideouts, but a web of human connections, of lives intertwined by destiny and kindness. John touched one of the luminous points, revealing the story of a family recently helped. "Last week," he explained, surprising Martha, "even without knowing my family's legacy, I was already unconsciously continuing its work. The mansion never ceased to be a refuge." "How?" Martha asked, curious. "Remember that family of artisans who needed a place to exhibit their work? Or the young writer who needed space and silence to finish his book? Without realizing it, I transformed my seclusion into a different form of help." The Guardian moved around the room, its presence now lighter, almost cheerful. The old shelves seemed to vibrate with renewed energy, as if the mansion's original purpose was fully awakening. "Vincent always said," Martha commented, "that the true power of the Vances was in their ability to adapt without losing their essence." John nodded, observing how Beatrice now examined the archives with different eyes, no longer looking for secrets to exploit, but stories to understand and honor. "The network needs to expand," he said, revealing more data on the screens. "The world has changed. The needs are different, but the essence remains the same: to protect, to support, to transform." "And you want my help?" Beatrice asked, still uncertain. "I want your experience, your knowledge, and especially your redemption," John replied. "Because that's what the Vances have always done. Believe in the power of transformation." The soft sound of Helen approaching with the tea brought a moment of pause to the conversation. The comforting aroma of herbs filled the environment, bringing a sense of normalcy to a night that had changed everything. "Mr. Vance," Helen called from the door, her voice carrying a contained surprise at seeing so many people in the normally quiet mansion. "I also brought some cookies." John smiled, realizing how each small detail, from the cookies carefully arranged by Helen to the old shelves that held so many secrets, was part of a greater whole, of a purpose that spanned generations. The Guardian settled near the newly lit fireplace, its wise eyes observing how the Vance circle of trust began to rebuild itself, now stronger, more conscious, more prepared for the challenges to come. The night that had begun with tension and mistrust was slowly transforming into a moment of renewal and hope. The Vance legacy had not only survived, it was ready to evolve. In the weeks that followed, the Vance mansion began to awaken from its long sleep. The silence that once weighed on the corridors was replaced by renewed energy, a purpose that seemed to make the very walls vibrate with life. John, once so reclusive, now moved through the property with quiet confidence, guided by the Guardian who rarely left his side. Each room of the mansion was being carefully adapted, blending respect for the past with the needs of the present. "It's impressive how everything is changing," Helen commented one morning as she arranged fresh flowers in the entrance hall. "And at the same time, Mr. Vance, it's as if the house is finally becoming what it always should have been." The library, once his solitary refuge, had transformed into the beating heart of the operation. The old shelves still held their treasures, but now shared space with modern equipment discreetly integrated into the traditional decor. Beatrice had become a constant presence, her experience and knowledge proving invaluable in modernizing the network. Her transformation was visible, the glint of ambition in her eyes replaced by a serene determination to make a difference. "I found some more interesting documents," she said one afternoon, entering the library with an old folder. "Records of routes we can reactivate, adapting them to modern times." John examined the papers carefully, the Guardian curiously observing over his shoulder. "Amazing how my grandfather thought of everything. These routes can be perfectly integrated into our digital system." Martha, who now spent more time at the mansion than in her own home, smiled as she observed the interaction. Vincent always said that the true treasure of the Vances was in the people, not the places. I see he was right. The property was also changing. The gardens, once maintained in sterile perfection, now came to life with new flower beds and discreet paths. The guardian often guided visitors through these trails, as if knowing exactly who needed to see what. "It's almost as if he understands each person who arrives," commented Helen, observing the dog guide a young artist to a newly adapted studio in the old barn. "Maybe he does understand," John replied, smiling. "There are more mysteries on this property than we'll ever be able to explain." The underground tunnels, now carefully mapped and renovated, continued to serve their original purpose, but in new and creative ways. Artists needing space to create, writers seeking silence to work, people needing a fresh start, all found their place in the Vance network. "Your grandfather would be proud," Martha said one night, as they examined the new digital maps in the library. "You haven't just preserved the legacy, you've made it grow." The guardian, lying near the fireplace, raised his head as if in agreement. John observed the animal affectionately, remembering that first encounter that had changed his life. "You know what's most interesting?" he commented, adjusting some data in the system. "The more people we help, the stronger the network becomes. Each new story, each transformation, adds a new layer of meaning to what we do." Beatrice, who was working on a new security protocol, nodded. "It's as if each person brings their own light to this place. The mansion has never been so alive." Her words echoed a truth that everyone felt. The Vance mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had transformed into a beacon of hope, a meeting point where past and present merged into something greater than the sum of its parts. And at the center of it all, the guardian continued his silent vigil, his wise eyes observing how the Vance legacy flourished under new leadership, adapting to new times without losing its fundamental essence, the belief in the power of transformation and the importance of extending a hand to those in need. News about the changes at the Vance mansion spread through the region like a gentle breeze of renewal. What was once seen as a mysterious and isolated property now emanated a welcoming energy that attracted people from different places and backgrounds. "It's amazing how the place has changed," commented Martha during an autumn afternoon, observing a group of young artists working on their projects in the garden. "But what's most impressive is how you've changed, John. Indeed, the man who once lived secluded among his antiques now moved with ease among the visitors, always accompanied by the faithful guardian." His serious expression had softened, though he maintained that air of mystery characteristic of the Vances. "Sometimes I wonder," John replied, absently adjusting the medallion around his neck, "if it wasn't the mansion that changed me, as if it had just been waiting for the right moment to awaken." Helen, passing by with a tray of tea, smiled as she heard the comment. The housekeeper, once concerned about her employer's isolation, now coordinated a small team that helped keep the property functioning in its new configuration. "Do you remember that family of musicians who arrived last week?" she asked, placing the tray on an antique table. "They transformed that old music room into an incredible studio. The melodies that come out of there seem to make the whole house vibrate." The guardian, who was resting near John's feet, raised his ears at the sound of approaching footsteps. Beatrice appeared in the garden, carrying a folder with new documents. "I just received another request for help," she announced, her eyes shining with renewed purpose. "A young writer needs a safe place to finish her book. There's something special about her, the kind of energy that fits with this place." John examined the file, recognizing in the details presented the same pattern his grandfather had valued so much: people with the potential to transform not only their own lives but also the lives of others. "Prepare the East Tower room," he instructed Helen, "the one with the view of the mountains. Writers need wide horizons." The guardian stood up, as if already knowing he would have a new person to guide through the property's paths. Martha observed the animal with a knowing smile. "You know, John," she commented, "your grandfather always said that the true magic of the Vances wasn't in the tunnels or secrets, but in the ability to recognize the right moment to act." The guardian seems to have inherited that wisdom. The afternoon advanced, painting the sky with golden hues that made the mansion seem even more imposing. In the garden, the artists began to gather their materials, their animated conversations mixing with the sound of birds returning to their nests. "It's as if each person who passes through here leaves a bit of their light," observed Beatrice, her voice carrying the weight of experience and redemption. The mansion absorbs these energies, these stories, and transforms them into something greater. John nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. Each room in the house now told multiple stories, not just of the Vances' past, but also of the present they were building together. The Guardian moved towards the main gate, his posture indicating that someone else was approaching. This was how it was now. The Vance mansion would never again be a place of isolation, but a meeting point where stories intersected and lives were transformed. "The legacy continues," murmured Martha, watching John walk towards the new visitor. "But now it's more than just protecting secrets. It's about creating possibilities." Night was beginning to fall over the Blue Ridge Mountains, but the Vance mansion shone with its own light, the light of the stories it held, the lives it transformed, and the mysteries it had yet to reveal. Winter arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains, bringing with it a soft layer of mist that enveloped the Vance mansion like a protective mantle. 6 months had passed since that night that changed everything, and the transformations were evident in every corner of the property. In the library, now a vibrant space of creativity and knowledge, John was organizing the year's final records. The Guardian, always attentive, rested near the lit fireplace, his wise eyes observing the constant movement of people that had now become part of the house's routine. "It's impressive," commented Beatrice, entering the library with a new stack of documents. "In just 6 months, we've helped more people than in the last 5 years. John smiled, leafing through one of the new records. Each folder told a story of transformation. Artists who found their voice, writers who completed their works, people who rediscovered their purpose. "It's not just us," he replied, gesturing towards the Guardian. "It's as if the mansion itself knows exactly who needs to be here and when." Helen entered, bringing a tray with coffee and fresh cookies. The housekeeper, who once cared for a silent house, now coordinated a small team that kept the mansion running as a true center of renewal. "The young writer in the East Tower finished her book," she announced proudly. She said she had never found a place with so much inspiration. The Guardian raised his head, his attentive ears catching the sound of music coming from one of the improvised studios. The soft melody mixed with the crackling of the fire in the fireplace, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "Victor would be proud," said Martha, who had just arrived. "The Vance mansion has once again become exactly what he always dreamed of, a beacon of hope and transformation." John touched the medallion on his neck, feeling its familiar weight. "You know what I've discovered in these months? That the true treasure was never hidden in the tunnels or secret maps." "No?" asked Beatrice, curious. "No," he confirmed, standing up to observe the movement in the garden through the window. "The treasure has always been in the possibilities, in the ability to transform lives, to create connections, to keep the flame of hope alive." The Guardian approached, gently leaning against his leg, as it always did in the most significant moments. Outside, the mist was beginning to dissipate, revealing the majestic contours of the mountains that protected the property. "Each person who passes through here," John continued, "adds a new layer to the Vance family history. We are no longer just guardians of secrets. We are guardians of dreams, of possibilities, of new beginnings." Helen smiled, remembering the reclusive John she had known for so many years. The transformation in her employer was as remarkable as that of the mansion itself. "And the most incredible thing," added Martha, "is that each success story attracts more people who need help. It's like a chain of light that continually expands." The sound of new visitors arriving made the Guardian move towards the door, ready for another of its mysterious guiding missions. John observed the animal with renewed admiration, understanding more and more its special role in this plot. The true magic of the Vances, he concluded, was never in the security systems or secret passages. It was in the ability to recognize the potential for transformation in every person who crosses our path. The afternoon advanced, and with it the mansion pulsed with its new life. In the studios, in the gardens, in the study rooms, in every corner, stories were being written, dreams were taking shape, lives were being transformed. The Vance legacy had found its true purpose, and the mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now shone as a beacon of hope in the Blue Ridge Mountains. On an especially starry night, John walked through the gardens of the Vance mansion accompanied by the Guardian. A year had passed since that night that changed his life, and the property now radiated a different energy, as if every stone, every tree, every corner held a renewed purpose. "It's amazing how everything has changed," commented Beatrice, who had joined him on the night walk. And at the same time, it seems like it's always been this way. The Guardian ran ahead of them, occasionally stopping to observe the lights shining in the different windows of the mansion. In each room, a different story unfolded. A painter finishing his masterpiece, a musician composing his next song, a writer discovering the perfect ending for her story. "You know what impresses me the most?" replied John, stopping to observe the illuminated mansion. "How each person who passes through here leaves a unique mark, but they're all part of something bigger." Helen appeared on the veranda, waving to get his attention. "Mr. Vance, another letter has arrived. I think you'll want to read this one." The letter was from one of the first people they had helped after the mansion's transformation, a young photographer who had found refuge there when she needed to rediscover her art. Now she had a famous exhibition traveling the world, showing the hidden beauty in unlikely places. "Each of these stories," said Martha, who had joined them with a cup of tea in her hands, "is a confirmation of what your grandfather always knew, that the true power lies in believing in people." The Guardian barked softly, as if in agreement. Its role in the mansion remained as mysterious as on the first day, always knowing exactly who needed help, always guiding people along the right paths. "The network continues to grow," commented Beatrice, now fully dedicated to her role of coordinating operations. "Each person we help becomes a new point of light, expanding the reach of what we do here." John smiled, touching the medallion that never left his neck. "And each new point of light illuminates the way for others who need help." The night was especially clear, and the lights of the mansion reflected in the windows like earthly stars. In the music studio, a soft melody floated through the air, mixing with the sound of wind in the century-old trees. Victor always said, Martha remembered, that the true magic of the Vances was in their ability to evolve without losing their essence. The Guardian sat at John's feet, its wise eyes reflecting the lights of the mansion. It was as if it knew that its initial mission, awakening John to his true purpose, had been just the beginning of something much greater. "The treasure was never hidden," concluded John, observing the life pulsing in his property. "It was in plain sight, waiting only for us to open our hearts to see it." The Vance mansion, once a symbol of isolation, was now a beacon of hope in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Each person who passed through its gates carried with them a part of its magic, spreading light wherever they went. And so, night after night, the Vance legacy continued alive, transforming lives, creating possibilities, keeping the flame of hope burning. The Guardian, always vigilant, continued its eternal mission, guiding those who needed to find their way back to the light. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of John Vance and the mysterious Guardian has touched your hearts. This is a narrative